The trouble with attempting to outrun an explosion was the sheer speed at which they moved. It wasn't faster than the speed of sound per se, but it was definitely fast enough to be a nuisance. And it also didn't help that the floor was on fire. Nevertheless, Sonic ran with Metal in his arms, though the inferno singed the tip of his quills, and every breath trapped fire in his chest. While his lungs cried out, the greatest pain was much deeper. He had never felt his heart stammer so erratically. Not to mention his arms. Metal just had to position himself in the perfect spot to cut off circulation. Meds, you gotta cut down on the chili dogs. Sonic choked as the smoke blurred his vision. You could stand to lose a few pounds. Sonic, focus! Look ahead! Sonic tried to look ahead, but he only saw more smoke grating his eyes. What is it? It's a dead end, but I see something above. On my word, I need you to jump. Sonic had no time to question. All his lungs wanted was oxygen, and the fire was doing a great job at refusing to share. Ready? Jump! He shifted his legs and jumped as far as he could, despite Metal's excess weight. Though he couldn't see, he trusted Metal, and his lungs were certain there would be air on the other side. He felt his feet brush the edge, and Sonic landed on something cool, wet, and decidedly the opposite of air. The endless pressure of rushing water slammed against him. It flung him down some darkening pipe, and in the moment of confusion, he choked again. Water caught in his throat, and he felt Metal slip from his grasp. Of course, it had to be water, Sonic thought. Panic welled in the back of his mind, but he forced himself to focus. Whatever happened, he could not afford to get separated from Metal again. The familiar darkness encroached on his vision, and his consciousness began to fade. His senses went numb, and he felt almost nothing. Nothing except his magnetic foot activating as Metal grabbed his heel. He felt Metal's arm slip below his own and pull him up. His head broke the surface, and while Metal dragged him from the water, his lungs reasserted their control. He coughed, then coughed again. He would have fallen over had Metal not supported him, with his arms wrapped around his back. Sonic leaned against Metal's chest, grateful for both the support and the heat against his wet fur. At last, he caught his breath and opened his eyes. The fire was gone, and they now sat on the narrow edge of an enormous industrial cavern. Above, a yellow waterfall crashed and rushed down an infinitely steep and dark cavern, and its deafening roar drowned out all possibility of other sounds. It was dark, and it would have been impossible to see but for a pathetic fluorescent bulb hanging above a dingy closet door. Metal stood up, and Sonic shivered, disappointed the only source of heat left, but stood up himself. Metal was looking over the edge, so Sonic turned his attention to the dingy door. He stepped up to it and placed his hand over the knob. Slowly, he twisted it open. The other side could not have been more disappointing. It was a simple utility closet, littered with dust, random tools, and cleaning supplies. Sonic frowned and grabbed a Browning mob, long past its glory days, and returned to Metal. Metal had stepped back from the ledge. He caught the broom as Sonic threw it at him. Why is there a janitorial closet sitting on this random ledge and literally nothing else? Sonic asked as he folded his arms. Metal took the mob and placed it back in the closet. We appear to be in the main line of Nega's industrial wastewater network. Look down here. Sonic looked down. He could still see little of the rushing water. It was just too dark, and he had no idea how far they had come, nor how far below the water ran. My current hypothesis is Nega has some type of aerial maintenance unit that supplies this station. It would maintain the wastewater network and repair damage to the lines. Ha! I bet it has its work cut out for it right now. We sure smoked Nega's tail up there. Metal walked into the closet. Which brings me to our next problem. We appear to be stuck here, unless you want to try jumping down another waterfall. Sonic went to open his mouth, but Metal added, Please do not take that literally. I am not suggesting we jump down the waterfall. Wait, was that a joke? Sonic said. Metal didn't respond. Instead, he walked into the closet, scooped something from the shelf, and returned to stop inches away from Sonic. He lifted his hand, and it hovered impatiently above Sonic's fists. So Sonic opened his palm. Into it dropped a single cable and a hex wrench. What's this? The wrench is from the closet, and the cable is from E2046. He held the cable to his face. The ends were hopelessly frayed with black soot. How useful. I'm sure this puny cable will make a great boat. I am not joking. This is important, and I need you to focus, Metal said. Sonic went to retort, but when he saw the intensity of Metal's gaze, he shut his mouth. He would try to focus, though he hated to do it. When he was focused, his mind wandered, and when his mind wandered, he could feel his leg. You will fix my engine, then I will fly us down the rest of this pipe. This plan is optimal because you will not drown. Sonic stared at the cable, then at Metal, and then back to the cable. Are you kidding? Tails usually handles this stuff. All this techno garbage is way over my head. Well, Tails is not here, and we need to get down. Rest assured, my internal diagnostics indicate this will be a simple repair. Sonic rubbed his temples. Now that his lungs had quieted down, his head had taken the opportunity to remind him of his pounding migraine and the exhaustion behind his eyelids. Yeah, well, how do I know you're not just gonna fly off and leave me here for dead? Sonic startled as Metal threw both his hands around Sonic's shoulders. If I wanted you dead, you already would be. This is the optimal branch of the decision tree, and you have my word that I will not leave you. Sonic gulped. It wasn't that he doubted Metal, but he did doubt himself. It was an uncomfortable and rare feeling, but his technical abilities were abysmal. He had always destroyed robots. He had never fixed them. What if I mess up? What if I just make it worse? Metal let go and scooped up the wrench. He rolled Sonic's fingers over the handle. I know you will not make it worse. All right, I'll try. I can't promise anything, but I'll try, Sonic said as he pulled off his gloves. He wrung the water from them, then threw them over the door to dry. He had to at least try. He owed as much to Metal, and if he did succeed, it would help Metal immensely. Metal nodded and sat on the ground. He leaned his chest over his legs and stretched forward. Sonic was taken aback by the elegance in his movements. Metal was surprisingly flexible. Do you see the maintenance panel below the turbine? Sonic sat down himself and scooted next to Metal. The panel was exposed at the bottom of Metal's back, and he ran his fingers against the seam. Take the wrench and remove the bolts. Sonic gazed at the panel, turned to the wrench, then froze as a single thought bubbled to the forefront of his mind. Icy horror slowly crawled into his veins, and time seemed to slow all around him. He tried to think of something else, of anything else, but a single thought demanded his attention. Eggman used animals to power his robots. Do you need additional instruction? Metal's familiar voice brought him back to reality. His finger was still pressed to the seam on Metal's back. Cold sweat ran through his quills. Meds? Are you... Am I what? Metal turned his head back, and all Sonic could see were each of the meticulous red lines of his eyes. Powered. How are you powered? Metal hesitated, and Sonic had to fight the growing dizziness in his head. If Metal was powered by an animal, what was he going to do? He stared at the wrench in his hand. He knew what he had to do. He would free the animal. It was what a hero would do. It was what Sonic the Hedgehog had always done. Electricity, Metal said. Electricity? Sonic had almost forgotten the original question, but as he repeated the word, it sprang back to mind. Have you not noticed? I have to plug myself into the wall every night. I know it's antiquated, but you can blame Eggman for that. Metal gazed at the ceiling. He put me on a short leash after the incident. Electricity. A stupid grin slowly overtook his face. You're powered by electricity. Metal turned back in confusion, but Sonic lunged forward and threw his arms around Metal in embrace. That's the best thing I've heard all day. Metal hesitated, then gently patted Sonic on the back. Sonic relaxed for a brief moment, but quickly returned to staring ahead blankly. Metal was powered by electricity. The ethical dilemma was resolved. I have to give you credit. Your inquiry is relevant. Repairing an electrical motor is a simpler task than almost any other energy source, Metal said. Right, the more you know, Sonic said. Technical incompetence aside, the exhaustion pounding inside his skull did not help his focus. If you're ready, I can guide you through the rest of the process. Unscrew the panel with the wrench. Sonic slapped his forehead, dragging his hand down his face, but picked up the wrench from the floor. He slid it into one of the bolts and turned gently. The bolt came loose, and he took it into his palm. Metal held his hand back. Give me the bolt. I will ensure we do not lose any parts. Carefully, Sonic placed the bolt in Metal's palm and unscrewed the others. He pressed his fingers into the seam of the panel, popped it free, and set it aside. Leaning forward, he stared with his face hovering inches from inside of Metal. It was worse than he thought. Dozens of cables twisted in a heap, but that was the least of his problems. That honor went to the pieces of shrapnel and soot covering every inch of his engine cavity. "Can you give me an estimate of the damage? My internal diagnostics can only measure so much." Sonic held a piece of shrapnel to his face. Familiar blue paint chipped from its surface. He slowly lowered it and dropped it into Metal's palm. Metal held it up to his eyes and shook his head. "This is worse than I estimated. I am frankly surprised this did not bring me offline entirely." He flicked the shrapnel into the water. "Regardless, let us continue the repair," Metal said as he dropped the cable into Sonic's hand. "Do you see the black cable? It connects the battery to the motor." Sonic heard Metal's voice, but he didn't process the words. Rather, it was a pair of closed, feathered eyes that claimed his attention. From behind the tangled mess was something he had destroyed many times in his life. It was Eggman's trademark life support unit, and inside it there were eyes. Metal must have sensed his hesitation because he added, "It should be one of the cables on top." The world went silent as Sonic felt his chest tighten. He brushed aside half a dozen cables, and his view of the life support unit became clear. Inside it was a Flicky. It lay unconscious behind the seared glass and peeling yellow paint of the life support unit. Metal turned his head back. "Is everything all right? You have stopped." You said electricity. That's not..." "Right, as I said. My battery is beneath the life support unit. You should be able to connect the cable below." "But why..."
"Why what?"
"The Flicky. You said electricity."
Metal's optics widened. "I see your misunderstanding. Were you not aware the animals were never for energy?"
Sonic just choked. "So, I can just let him out?"
"What? No! The animals for computational power, not energy. Without it, my decision engine would be limited to functions that are Turing complete. Under no circumstance can it be removed. Consider this. A bird can fly effortlessly down a hallway, but the same cannot be said for a machine. Even the most basic of motor functions are computationally infeasible. So when Eggman designed his robots, he found a simple CPU was not enough. Think of a Flicky as a specialized piece of hardware dedicated to certain computational tasks, a BPU, or biological processing unit."
Sonic opened his mouth, but no words came out.
"So as I was saying, you need to plug the new cable into the battery. The frayed ends should not matter as long as the copper touches."
His eyes wandered to the unconscious Flicky. He knew what he would do. Metal Sonic was a badnik. Sonic the Hedgehog freed animals from badniks. He trembled as he reached for the life support unit. It would be simple. All he had to do was pop the unit open and the Flicky would be free. His fingers brushed a piece of shrapnel and Sonic yelped. He quickly stuffed his finger in his mouth and the taste of his own blood spread across his tongue.
"Sonic, are you alright? Did you injure yourself?"
Sonic's eyes met with Metal's optics. He stared at each and every red line in his screen, mesmerized by the way the red glowed brightly, yet dropped quickly. I'm fine," Sonic choked. He pulled his finger from his mouth and felt ashamed when he saw the injury was no deeper than a paper cut. He was drowning in his own mind. Dozens of thoughts competed for attention, and his consciousness couldn't keep up. Sonic panted. He ran his fingers back over the life support unit. There was the trapped Flicky, but underneath it was just as Metal said, the battery and the problem. A single black cable had connected the battery to the motor, but it was now snapped in half. The cable is broken. Hearing his own voice brought a measure of order to his consciousness.
"Pull it from the sockets."
Sonic watched himself unsnap the cable and place both broken ends in Metal's palm. Metal held the pieces up to his face.
"Well, that explains why the engine was powerless. Now take the new cable and connect it."
Sonic hesitated as he felt each erratic beat of his pounding heart, but his body shifted to autopilot. By some miracle, his hands coordinated the motions to jam the cable into the socket. They even managed to fully bury the exposed copper ends. Finished.
"Good. Now place the panel back on and screw in the bolts. We cannot do any more without additional equipment."
Now that it had momentum, his body could not be stopped. His hands snapped the panel in place, took each bolt from Metal's palm, and screwed them in. Metal stood up, but Sonic only continued to tremble on the floor.
"Activating turbine engine in 3, 2, 1.
Metal leaned forward, but nothing happened. He straightened back up and placed his hand over his intake panel.
It did not work,
Metal said, shaking his head.
The damage must be too severe.
Oh, so we're still stuck then, Sonic heard his own voice say. There it was again, that familiar fuzzy feeling on the edge of his vision, and Sonic embraced it like an old friend. He slipped to the floor and felt the cool and dusty tile against his cheek. He may as well just lay on the floor. It was all he was good for. He couldn't help Metal, and he couldn't free the Flicky, but he could at last lay on the floor. And yet, when had he ever just given up and laid on the floor? That wasn't something Sonic the Hedgehog did. Sonic the Hedgehog was the single greatest, most capable hero who had ever lived. Sonic the Hedgehog would have been able to help Metal. Sonic the Hedgehog would have saved the Flicky. But he had failed to help Metal. He had failed to save the Flicky. And there it was, the truth. It was so blindingly obvious. He had failed. Sonic the Hedgehog never failed. So he was no longer Sonic the Hedgehog. He was now Sonic the Cyborg, a freak and a failure, twisted by the very forces of technology he sought to fight. He was no hero, and he was no hedgehog.
Sonic, are you okay?
He heard Metal rush over to his side, and he felt Metal's fingers brush against his neck.
Your pulse is better than before, but not by much. I am sorry. I should have never let you push yourself this far in your condition. We will rest here until you are well. I will find you sustenance.
Sonic remained motionless, but he did manage to watch as Metal scooped a small bucket from the closet and filled it with the rushing yellow water.
Drink this.
Metal dropped the bucket in front of his face. He peered over the edge. The water was as yellow as ever, and his disgust managed to form a coherent thought. How can this be safe to drink? You said it was industrial wastewater.
It is. That is how I know it is safe. Judging by the color, this water has a high concentration of lead acetone, which would kill any bacteria.
Oh, lead, my favorite. Sonic buried his forehead in the floor, although his throat felt dry. You know I can't drink this.
Yes, you can.
Sonic rolled up to face the ceiling. I suppose I could if I wanted to die from lead poisoning.
You are immune to lead poisoning. In fact, you should ingest heavy metals frequently for the nanites in your blood.
Sonic froze. The nanites in my blood?
Yes, I already explained this.
When Metal saw the look on Sonic's face, he shook his head.
I suppose you were not listening. This is critical to your health, so pay attention this time. The roboticizer does not only change your physiology, it changes your biochemistry as well. How else would you expect your biological systems to interface with the machinery of your leg?
Sonic felt his skin crawl. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. Metal continued.
Instead of producing blood cells, your new leg produces tiny, cell-sized machines called nanites. These nanites enter your circulatory system and travel through your entire body, where they eventually reach your brain. There, they rewire your neurons to interface with your new leg. This is why you could use your leg immediately. Otherwise, it would take months for you to learn to walk again. Your body requires a fair quantity of heavy metals to regulate the nanosystem, so the nanites modify your digestive tract as well. They change your taste buds so that you know what to eat, and they will automatically metabolize toxic liquids like acetone into glucose for the rest of your body.
Sonic could feel them. The nanites were in his blood, and he felt them. They were swimming around his body. They were in his brain. The nanites were in his brain. A broken sob escaped from his mouth as he curled into a ball. He buried his face in his hands and tried to disappear.
Sonic, why are you...
Sonic wanted to crawl out of his own skin and run far away, but there was no place to run, no place to hide, and no one to help him. Sonic the Hedgehog would have found a way out, but not him. Metal looked aside, but he did not hesitate. He slid his arm under Sonic and lifted him to his chest. Sonic simply fell forward into Metal's engine panel and continued to sob.
Drink this,
Metal said, lifting the bucket up to his lips.
You are dehydrated, and you need the energy.
Sonic felt the water run into his mouth. It tasted fantastic. It had a sweet metallic tang that soothed the fire in his throat. It was the single best thing he had ever tasted, better than any chili dog he had ever had. Sonic began to laugh, and his broken laughter cut into his sobbing.
Do you now feel better?
Metal asked as Sonic downed the rest of the water.
Oh, sure, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic choked on his own voice. He's great, wonderful, nothing can stop him.
Metal said nothing, but he continued to hold Sonic as his laughter turned back to tears, then into a choking cough, and finally died into muffled sobs.